Hey everyone, I hope you're doing okay, that you're safe and protected, and that you have good snacks. And I'm very happy to send you another episode with someone who is so comforting to talk to. We recorded this, I think, in December last year, so while we talked a bit about these times and it being challenging, we had no idea that a pandemic was coming. But yeah, things are interesting like that sometimes, and I just feel really excited to send you this interview right now because I think Alexis Cunningfolk, which by the way is the person I talked to, I should have probably mentioned that, just has so much wisdom to share about self and community care through difficulty, working with plants and tarot archetypes, and really centering re-enchantment in our work, in our life. So I really hope you enjoy this episode too, as much as I did just listening back to it. And I hope you'll check Alexis' work out if you feel like it. And also a sweet reminder that my Unravel program is starting this Friday on the 22nd of May. And this is a pay what you can program. It's a 6-week cocoon with a small group of people where we're gonna do different breathwork and ritual practices and a bit of writing each week. You can do that in your own time. It's really simple, really not huge, difficult practices. You probably won't need to buy anything. If you just have pen and paper and candles at home, that should do the trick. And then we'll have 3 live calls every 2 weeks where we'll do a deeper breathwork practice together and share a little bit about what has come up and what it means. And really, it's weaving together grief work, grief tending, and ritual and writing to explore what's happening, what is happening right now. What do we need to feel a little bit more grounded and resilient, and to kind of develop trust in our own ability to grieve well. I think that feels important to me right now. So like I said, it's a pay what you can program. You can become a patron at any level and join us, and I'll link to that in the show notes, and would love to have you. And I'm also here if you have questions. And now I'm gonna let you listen to the episode. Thank you so much. Bye. Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning into another episode. I know I always say this, but I really do carry such a big heart full of gratitude for my guests through the world, and just had such a nice check-in as we were beginning and preparing for this call. So today I'm speaking to Alexis Cunningfolk, who you might know from the apothecary words in Cunning. I hope I'm not mispronouncing this.
You got it right.
Great, fantastic. But they're doing such beautiful work in the world, let me tell you guys. They offer tarot classes. They do so much magical work around herbalism that's really grounded and tangible, and yet also really, really just very enchanting. Like, I feel very warm reading her zines, and just the way that plants are described and all these different practices are woven together feels very rich and very enriching in my life. So I've been following Alexis' work for a while, and I'm really excited we get to talk to today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. That was a lovely introduction.
I would love to begin, if that's cool, by asking you where you are in the world right now and what nature is like around you.
So right now I am in Northern California. I live in a city that's situated between 2 rivers. So we have this little kind of microclimate that happens. So right now in January, it's really foggy and we're expecting more rain. January is sort of our rainy season. And it's beautiful because it gets really, really hot here. Mm-hmm. And so having these colder winter days, it's not cold compared to many places. I really, really appreciate them. So it's beautiful. I saw a black eagle fly over our house the other day, which we're in the middle of the city, and other sort of birds of prey. And it's a really kind of slow and quiet time that I very much enjoy.
Sounds beautiful. Can you also tell us a little bit more about your work and what you care about?
Yeah, so I'm an herbalist and a witch, and that has been true for many, many years. And my work is centered around the reenchantment of the world and our lives. And I do that a lot through supporting healing and holy communities. Like that, that has been centered in my work since I was a much smaller thing. How I go about that has changed over the years, and this year has definitely been one of those change years. But primarily, I use tools of herbal medicine and magical practice to help folks remember themselves back home and wake up to being part of this world, to being an important and integral part of this world. So right now, that means I'm facilitating a lot of spaces that are very soft and easeful. And because we have such a climate of stress and overexertion and worry right now, kind of as a global culture, and as well as making a lot of space for grief. I think we're in a time of profound grieving as we figure out what we need to do next as a species, you know, as, yeah. And so I work with a lot, I work a lot with healers and other activists, especially those who are queer and folks of color. These are basically kind of your wounded healers who are often caring for others long before they remember to let others care for them as well as to care for themselves. So yeah, that's kind of my it's not quite an elevator speech, but that's where I'm at these days. Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic elevator speech. It's kind of like an elevator really deep into the earth.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of time, that's fine.
Yeah.
I really wish I could attend your local things. You're pretty far away from me with me being in Scotland, but they sound really beautiful and soft spaces are so needed. That's great.
I'm willing to come out to Scotland.
Really?
I actually studied abroad in Scotland, and it was it feels like one of the most beautiful places in the world to me. I love Scotland. Scotland was it was one of the most difficult periods of my life. And if I had not been there, I wouldn't be here today. So I have a lot of gratefulness for that land. So I'll come out to Scotland. We'll do
that. Amazing. Please let me know when you do. Where did you stay when you were here?
I studied at St. Andrews for a semester.
Cool.
Yeah. So, which was that was a culture shock because I came from a very progressive, feminist women's college with folks of all genders, but definitely women were seen as equal citizens. And I went to St. Andrews where there were only 2 women teaching as full-time professors. And that had only just happened. And it was a culture shock on a lot of levels. It was good.
I can imagine that's big. Yeah. For those listening that don't know, so St. Andrews is kind of, I would say, center east coast of Scotland. And it's a relatively small place with a pretty or relatively conservative university. I don't actually know a ton about the university landscape in Scotland, but I know that St. Andrews in my mind has always been the place where the royal family goes to study, for example.
Yeah, I was actually there when William was there.
Oh, God.
It was so bizarre on so many levels. The reason I went there is I was a politics major, and it's difficult to study politics abroad. And the college I went to had a old time relationship with it. So I was like, yeah, well, it's great. All colleges are liberal. But it was good. It inspired my work in many ways. I sort of wrote my thesis became this sort of reaction against this experience of wait, how did you know, the UK has, and we're getting on the tangent here, but the UK has such old roots of feminism and progressive politics, and somehow the US sort of stepped ahead briefly. I don't know. It was just, I learned a lot of things.
Yeah, I
It
can
was really
imagine.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But St. Andrews also isn't far from me, and it's also very near some beautiful, incredible
Oh,
landscapes. We
yeah.
have probably swum in the same part of the sea, which is exciting, and we maybe even
Yeah.
have seen the same seals, which is so cool to
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
imagine.
Well, and the pagan community there was amazing. It was just, it
Hmm.
was a very sweet time. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and the sea there is its own.
Hmm.
Oh, the gods are old and walking around out there. I mean, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So speaking about the gods and the magic and practices,
Yeah,
um,
there you go.
how did magic come into your life, and what does it look like for you at the moment on a day-to-day basis?
Right. So I was really lucky that when I was, so I'd always had an interest in, I guess what we would put under the esoteric umbrella. When I was 7, I checked out a book about ghost hunting and psychic powers geared towards kids. I now found these
Wow.
books again. They're amazing, right? And read, those were my manuals, and partly because I was really curious and I was trying to understand the psychic experiences I was having, and also because I was afraid. I was really, really afraid of ghosts,
Mm-hmm.
and I was trying to conquer that fear a little bit. And then we moved when I was 12 from the working class part of town to the very rich part of town. And it was a very hard transition on a number of levels. And I was fortunate enough to meet a pagan family, and they were kind of the first people to let me into their house
Mm-hmm.
and not talk down to me. And they were incredibly kind. And I watched as the mother made these beautiful goddess dolls. And then I learned about making altars. And right then and there, I made my first altar on the bedroom
Mm-hmm.
floor of my friend's room. And her mom came in and said, "Well, that's beautiful. You have a knack for that." And I mean, I learned what rice milk was. This was just a whole other experience for me. um, and, you know, that was, I wasn't looking for um, a change in religion. And I spent a year kind of, I was raised Episcopalian. I thought I was going to become an Episcopal priest or something. I was spiritually minded. And then it was just a calling,
Mm-hmm.
and began to learn about paganism and witchcraft. And yeah, and have continued on that path ever since. So
Mm-hmm.
these days, my day-to-day magical practice is sort of a mix of devotional work, and there's a lot of work with and communion with sort of the land spirits and ancestors, and sort of the myriad of family and community and self-care that I participate in. I've had a pretty consistent breath work based meditation practice since I was 12, which I
Mm-hmm.
started because I was having really bad reactions to my asthma medication. And someone, I think I had read in some book offhanded that, well, sometimes doing meditation helps people with asthma. So
Mm-hmm.
that's when I started. It was a great, great choice. And then, like, specifically right now in this sort of gloaming time between Yule and Imbolc, I'm thinking about sort of Imbolc is a time for me of kind of vow making of what I'm wanting to. I kind of make some simple vows for the time between Imbolc and Samhain. Um, and then there's lots of like checking in on candle making supplies. We make candles around Imbolc, our family. And I also tend to do a lot of medicine making planning at this time of year. So even though a great part of the world is in the northern hemisphere is under snow, our growing season is starting soon. So yeah, so I do plan around that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. I don't know. There's nothing. So just lots of simple things that I can show up to consistently. Is what my magical
Mm-hmm.
practice looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have always really loved the beauty and the simplicity of the rituals and practices that you offer. I've never opened a zine or engaged with a course and felt overwhelmed or unsure to begin. And I also felt really empowered to kind of drop into the particular space that I need at any given time. So, yeah, that makes sense. That's beautiful.
And also I'm learning also on how to like deliver information better, because I think what I tend to do is I'm so excited about all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And writing is one of the ways that I feel able to express myself, that I tend to overproduce.
Oh, well.
And I've learned, I feel like I got a little bit better with Tarot Apothecary, but I think there is sort of, it's been my lesson in like learning how to, I want people to feel invited in more than overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a big lesson for me as a teacher too.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. I love writing too, and I
Yeah.
love your writing, so yeah.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, so we're recording this in January of 2020, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a particular time. I actually don't even want to say anything about this
It is a
particular time.
particular time.
You
That's a
know?
really, yeah. Yeah.
um, I really just can't find any words. And also, I feel like in the last few years, I've opened a question so often with this, like, well, these are very particular times. I'm wondering what you're doing right now. But
Yeah.
I am actually really wondering if you have a favorite plant alley at the moment, or if there's a tarot archetype that you really like working with.
Yeah. Gosh, these are always the hardest questions for me. So I can say right now, I have this morning when I went out into the garden too, that some of the herbs are growing up. And so lemon balm is always one of the first herbs to pop up in our yard. And so I've been drinking fresh lemon balm tea the past few mornings. So I'm drinking right now. And lemon balm is Melissa officinalis, is one of those herbs that it has a special affinity for bees. Melissa, and its Latin binomial, its Latin name, refers to the Melissae of Greece, of ancient Greece. And they were bee priestesses, these sort of intermediaries between folks and the gods, as bees were seen as the creatures that delivered messages from the gods. And so lemon balm has always been this happy, buzzy little herb for me, that helps us connect back into sort of the larger community without feeling, we can feel part of the group, or we can feel like we are being overwhelmed and overrun by the group. And I think lemon balm helps us to remember and realize that we are a necessary part of this wild, interconnected whole that we exist in. I think it helps to, even though it's, I think, bees and buzzing and everything, it helps us to connect to the quieter parts of our mind, the ones that I think we can, all of us experience a lot of chatter. That's how our brains work. And I find lemon balm to really relax the nervous system and help us to connect with what we want to be thinking, as opposed to what we feel like we have to be thinking, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so lemon balm, I guess, is is the plant I'm working with right now. It's also just great on a number of levels. It's great for colds and flu. It's great for if you tend towards stomach upset or irritable bowel, nausea. It can be helpful with headaches when you combine it with other herbs like skullcap, scutellaria, latifloria. Yeah. Anyways, I'm not going to get totally on a tangent. As for tarot, um, I feel like this time of year is very much the star card for me.
Oh, yeah.
That quiet sort of timelessness where we pause between breaths. That's kind of what the star card feels like for me. It's one of my favorite cards in the deck. Yeah, so I would say that energetically, that's kind of where my practice is at, is a star card. I think I do talk about that in the Tarot Apothecary, one of our meditations. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. So
Yeah, I really love the star card a lot too, especially in Gia's tarot deck. I think that's my favorite star card. Very good. Um, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit.
yeah.
I would love to talk a little bit about business stuff as well. I'm noticing that you found really beautiful ways about in talking about pricing and making your work as accessible as possible while also honoring your time and energy, which is really hard to do under capitalism. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about how that unfolded for you and what economic justice means to you now, bearing in mind that I really don't expect a perfect or even static answer. I know this is really, just a wobbly thing that we're all kind of figuring out as we go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say my very first thing, this is a continuous process of learning and experimentation. I think a lot of folks, especially those of us kind of in the holistic, purple collar work where we do a lot of work but are often underpaid, whether by just community circumstance or because we're undercharging or whatever it might be, that I think a lot of folks feel like, oh, I got to figure out pricing and then I'll be done. And it doesn't quite happen like that. It's sort of, there should always be space, I think, for experimentation and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. I've made a ton of mistakes. I think I spend so much time talking about pricing and economic justice. Those are some of my most popular blog posts on the sliding scale and also alternatives to the sliding scale. Is there's very little information out there still, which is surprising to me, because there's very clever people doing all sorts of things around alternative economies and that, but we haven't spoken so much about sliding scale. And it's something I've personally struggled with, and so I've been trying to figure it out. This past year, something new that I tried was always having a pay it forward price in my offerings, which has been actually pretty successful. And so what that is that it's the price of the class plus a few dollars. And I think it's important to really explain to your community why you make your choices around pricing. I have a lot of info up on my site. You are very welcome to use it, put it back, because it keeps the conversation growing, which has been fantastic. And what a pay it forward price does is it helps to cover folks at the lower end of the scale. And so people feel really good if they're able to come in at this price point, feel really good about getting the class that they want to take and knowing that they're supporting others through this with very little effort on their part. But yeah, I think we need to keep talking about money. We need to, because if we don't talk about money, we don't talk about economic justice, and we don't talk about access realistically, it's really difficult to build something new. Right. And I think, especially it's different elsewhere, I know, but in the United States, we really struggle to talk about class. Everybody thinks they're middle class. We are not all middle class, right? Everybody thinks they're middle class. We are not all middle class. And there's a lot of angst and anxiety in sort of the social justice and activist communities around money and earning enough. And often what I say to folks is, would you ask anybody you are serving to live on as little as you are living on? And say that is a just thing to do.
Yeah.
Because what I want our healers to be being good housing, getting the food they need, and not worrying about those bills so they can show up to their work, because we need more people doing healing work, right? And I want them to, because but it's hard under capitalism, and it always will be, right? It's not a system that supports the type of radical change we're looking for, but there are ways to chip away, right? And to create these little sort of microclimates of change. So I think experimentation is really good. I think you should, in always I think people forget to remember that their time should be calculated into a price, like how much time it takes you to prepare something, setting up and putting down, and not just the small amount of time you might be interacting with someone too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, so important to mention too. I think there's so much complexity in pricing, especially
Yeah.
online. And
Yes.
I love people that have the courage to offer sliding scales and put in the work to educate people. And I will also admit that I haven't always felt good about it, or like, resentment around pricing has come up for me as well, because exactly what you're describing. I think sometimes it's easy to forget for people that there's so much more that goes into an offering than just the contact time that we have, or
Hmm.
that even though something is maybe a digital download in a way, we still kind of have to um yeah be be replenished for the time and energy that we've put into it, and then make space to create the next thing, and that will require research and dreaming and resting as well, and that creates the beautiful stuff that is so needed. And also, I'm really excited about all the different tools that we now have available. So while there is sometimes frustration, I think there's also so much hope, because we're now able to talk to each other in real time, internationally, about the different practices that we're trying. There's more of a sense of playfulness, because the technology that we can use is so fast paced, which obviously also has a lot of downsides. But I feel that I've been able, in a way, to be much more experimental than I imagined, for example, as a young teenager, my grown up work life to be. I think things are a little bit less static, and that's quite beautiful and exciting too.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, definitely. And I would also like, I don't offer sliding scales on all my offerings because it didn't make sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? I You have to also take into consideration, and because technology has also gotten better, it's easier to offer sliding scale now with different technological options. It's easier to offer payment plans and all that kind of stuff. What I would say though is, remember that you have to, when making these different offerings and adjustments, you have to take in consideration how much time it is going to take for you to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether there's always going to be stuff we do in our businesses that we don't like doing, but we don't want those to be dominant in our
Mm-hmm.
business and to
Mm-hmm.
take up too much space. And yeah, and you can always change your prices. You can always, I used to feel so bad every time I changed my prices. I don't anymore. I feel bad about other things, but that is not something I feel bad about anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I don't offer sliding scale everywhere because um, it didn't make sense on a couple different levels. But I do try. What I try to explain to my communities now is, like, when you pay full price for something, you allow me to offer free things and low cost things on a level that I'm not able to do unless folks are supporting my work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and things like Patreon, that's where actually I've been kind of investigating more, is these little, they're not micro lending, but these little micro payment
Mm-hmm.
communities, which can be really fantastic.
Oh
Um,
yes.
right? You have a Patreon, and so
Oh
I've
my
had a
God.
few, right? And how? Yeah, I'm curious. How has that been for you then?
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you what a big difference Patreon has made in my life. Like, not just
Yeah.
financially, but spiritually, creatively, just in how I um hold potential for my life, to be honest, which I know sounds a little bit
Mm-hmm.
dramatic, but I have started my Patreon 2 years ago, and I think I started it at a time where it was a little bit more new and exciting to people. So there was, in the first year, like a really steady, very surprising growth, actually. I think
Yeah.
I got to like 165 patrons, I think. That was at its height, probably in spring last year, 2019. So like
Yeah.
a year and a few months in. And I did that mainly because I offered all my courses and programs in exchange for pledges. So instead of kind of offering one-off payments, I asked people to pledge $3, $6, or $9 for my embodied magic program, or $11 for my business class. And I had at that point been podcasting for a number of years. So I had a very engaged audience. I don't want to call it big or small because there's really no point. It totally depends on,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but there were people that had already known my work and they were kind of excited about those programs. And then they were very affordable. I will say that there have been times where I was a little bit sad about people signing up just for a month, not really engaging with the material and then dropping it again, because obviously that is, that's a bit disheartening, I guess. And but this steady income has really helped me to get out of this rat race of launching things. I have another business other than this one. So this one is called Daydream Wolves, and I also have Yarrow Digital, which is a web design and business mentoring studio. And I support my clients in launching a lot, and I love that work. I really love the tech and design aspect for that because I'm geeky like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to launching, I've really seen. Hi, dog.
Yes, that's all. The mail is arriving.
Oh yeah.
It's quiet. I know it's. Just go lay down. Come lay down. Sorry.
That's totally fine. Totally fine.
He'll quiet down in just a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it has helped me to launch my courses without having these big pushes for them. And I think there's a lot with these pushes, they're not all bad. And of course we have to share what we're offering. And sometimes those things are time sensitive and that totally makes sense. And sometimes they're seasonal, that I'm not kind of raging against all of that as a blanket statement, but I think launching has always felt a little bit fraught for me, and I think there's a lot of stuff that comes up around self-worth and communication and scarcity marketing and those kinds of things. And so having a continuously open enrollment and allowing people to just kind of commit to my work rather than buying a thing, that has been really beautiful. So I feel like the deal that I have with my patrons is, hey, you support me financially, energetically, I offer you my work, and we'll be in this relationship for as long as it feels good for both of us. And that's different than this kind of, one-off transaction of like, hey, here is my thing, please buy it. So
I found your Patreon page to be very inspiring. I love how you've set it up. No, really, I've been looking at a bunch of different, Patrons and kind of how people do it, and you've done it in a unique way. I think folks are interested in maybe starting their own Patreon and how you should check out Yarrow's page.
Oh, thanks.
No, really, I feel inspired. I'm like, oh, well, that would be a great way to, like, because I have some low cost ebooks, right? Like my little digital zines. And I'm like, but that would be cool. There'd be a little community built up around that. Because I like hearing how people change the recipes or experiment with them and that. So I found your page really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I want to say also, though, that it has really decreased in numbers last year. So the height, like I said, was like 160 last spring. And I had a bit of a challenging time in my own life last winter and spring. And so I stopped podcasting. I wasn't on social media so much anymore. And then I shifted the business class to a different payment system because I wanted to diversify a little bit. I was getting nervous about getting so much of my income through Patreon. Because you never know, it isn't my own technology at the end of the day. And so that has decreased a little bit. And I've also ended my embodied magic program, which ran for 2 years. And this year I'm allowing myself to kind of offer more spontaneous shorter classes for patrons as I go. So all this to say, little waffle, I think it's a beautiful tool. I would love to be your patron if you start one. And I really encourage people to, consider supporting a few people over a period of time if you can. Even if it's just $1, it feels so good to get $1 pledges, honestly, because I feel like what someone is saying is like, hey, I see you, and I think your work is worth something, even if I can't afford to offer you a ton in exchange, and that's okay. So, yeah.
Well, I have, there's a few folks that I support on Patreon, and I feel like if they were living in the same city with me, the amount that I spend each year, it would be taking them out for dinner. I would do that with my friends, right? It's not, but I know because I have like a little, people can donate to me. It's not a Patreon, it's just on my page, but those donations mean it's not a lot, but it means that helps me pay one bill, that helps me get some groceries, right? It's such a good feeling to know that you have, no matter how big or small, that this amount is coming in, because
Mm-hmm.
running your own business can be
Mm-hmm.
such, right? It's, you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
You
so
just don't
yeah,
know. Totally true. Yeah, totally
yeah.
true. There's so many other questions that I want to ask you. So
Yeah.
I mean I we can, yeah, oh God, it's such a big topic, isn't it? I didn't mean to cut you off either. And also I have so many other cool questions.
No, yeah, please.
What
I think
about
we could both talk about money for
yes,
our podcast.
totally, totally. Um, I'm wondering, seeing it is January in a very particular time in human history, what your
Yeah.
favorite self-care or community practices for winter or difficult times are.
Yeah.
And by the way, oh, so sorry, when I say self-care, I also want to say I love that the way you frame self-care, and I know that you have written about how it's sometimes really just simplified and watered down and commodified in some way. So I just want to frame it and say I know that you have complex and beautiful thoughts on this. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah, I've been having a tumultuous relationship with self-care, and I think a lot of folks too, as it's become created, like self-care has become this thing that's now a very capitalist, like packaged marketing thing, and it can isolate people too, especially in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, where we have a failing medical system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we can't access just basic medical care with ease.
Mm-hmm.
um, this idea of, well, take care of yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If there's also in the United States a culture of, uh, well, if you're sick, it's because you kind of deserved it, or if you're poor, it's because you've not worked hard enough, right? All these sort of things. And so I see that sometimes edging into our self-care narratives. And I
Mm-hmm.
think taking care of ourselves, the ultimate thing is to get us back into community,
Mm-hmm.
right? That should be, it shouldn't be, oh, I'm going to get myself I'm going to get good, right? I'm going to repair
Mm-hmm.
all my broken bits so that I'm a whole, perfect being that can go back. Then community will accept me back, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think, especially as healers and activists, and that we need to start asking ourselves, as part of our self-care is, how am I allowing other people to take care of me?
Mm-hmm.
How am I not just asking, but allow, because we don't even have to ask half the time. There are people in our lives who want to take care of us, and also creatures, dogs, right? My dog is the most wonderful, little emotional support animal ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I very easily allow him to come in. I have a harder time letting people do that. And that's been
Mm-hmm.
sort of, so part of my self-care is remembering that my ultimate goal is to get back into community, is to break up this spell of fracturedness and isolation that this sort of dominant overculture really hammers into us to believe. So, as specific tools, breath work is always something that I turn to. It has not, and I mean, it can be any, just like simple breathing. It can be sort of your square breathing. It can be breathing with guided meditations or whatever. For a while, when I was too anxious to do my breath work, I knitted. I sat for 15 minutes and I did a simple knitting project, but that helped with the pattern of the needles and the yarn and everything like that. Was able to return to my breath without focusing too much on my breath, because sometimes those of us who are more anxious, breath work can be extremely challenging. And so, but there's so many varieties that you can work with. I would
Mm-hmm.
say getting outside as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I choose, and I am grateful for how simple these healing things can be. Sometimes going outside for me is taking out the trash and pulling weeds from the garden and other days I'm going outside and remembering how my ancestors have spent most of their lives outside, and I'm breathing this air that was created by the legacy of their breaths, and I'm surrounded by holy beings, and I am that holiness, and there is no barrier, right? Both those things happen. And I think in these particular times, practice, whatever your practice looks like, is, and knowing that it's this, and committing to consistency, and knowing that every season is an opportunity to kind of re-examine what we want to be doing consistently, and understanding that there's sort of patterns of consistency that bring us into practice. So that could be meditation or praying or just drinking water mindfully, or showing up and giving, like, and listening carefully to someone else, that brings us into practice. And there are those patterns which pull us out of practice. For me, that was social media, which is why I'm not it anymore, right? It was a big practice destroyer in my life. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing consistently. And so I think in a world where there feels like there's increasingly less choice, on, that making the small choices on what we want to consistently be putting our consciousness into, right? Whether it's putting our consciousness into a little phone, or maybe it's into, and it's not condemning technology, right? Like, there's so many good things, but I think that our social media is set up not to serve us, right? I think that's just true. Like, there's a lot of good things that can come out of social media. There's communities that can be built. There's information that can be shared, but the actual tools itself is not set up to serve us and support our mental health. And, and that's a hard place for us to be in, because we don't really have anything else right now. We've grown up with this, right? But I still think we can make our choices on where do we consistently want to be waking up and being alive in the world, and dreaming deep under trees, or whatever it might be. And just knowing that you're going to go outside sometimes and it's going to feel profound. You're going to go outside sometimes and it's just going to feel cold and wet and you want to be back inside, right? That's not going outside every day still, right? Yeah. It's working that muscle, so that sort of mystical, magical muscle, so that when those moments of bliss show up, we can ride them.
Yeah, and I think that you're totally right. The commitment to the consistency is allowing our nervous systems to settle, to be able to see those really beautiful, enchanting moments. Like, I love having dogs because they force me to go outside 4 or 5 times a day.
Yeah.
And so, like, there is a rhythm and a pace to our days, and there's no question about it, whether it's raining or not, and we live in Scotland, so it's raining a lot. But then because this routine really kind of is soothing to all 3 of us, there is also capacity to see these really beautiful moments. So yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we close? Which I wish we didn't have to. We could definitely talk for hours and hours, and I hope that you might be on the podcast again. But
that'd be lovely. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, but for now, is there anything else that you want us to know about, other than your work, which we'll also ask about in a minute?
I want folks to know how much they are loved. I think that's what's coming up for me a lot as we're having these conversations. Like, we are so, in these particular times, I'm going to be using that phrase a lot now, in these particular times, because they're not just challenging, they're also inspiring, right? We are waking up and trying to be more kind as a species in ways that we haven't in a while, right? And I think that's inspiring. And so I think we can be really distracted or busy or afraid or forgetful of how much we are so loved. And it can be hard to see that. It can be hard to have faith in other people, but there's that tree in your backyard, that, your dogs in your life, or other people in your life, because it can be hard to understand when other people love you, right? But you are loved and you are necessary, and this world is a more whole and sacred place with you in it. And that's just, we're not told that enough. And that's I think
So
that's
true.
I think that's what I needed to hear this year a lot. I know
Mm-hmm.
that, and so I'm hoping that maybe there's someone out there who's having a hard time believing that. But just know that you are loved, like that there are rocks out on the street, right? It is just a
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
you know? Yeah.
totally. Such a beautiful thing to end on. I really love that. What are you currently offering and where can people find you?
So you can find me wartsandcunning.com. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm not on social media these days. So my newsletter is really kind of the place to keep up to date with everything. And that's also where I share more behind the scenes stuff, as well as like puppy videos. But I teach both online and in person. I teach a couple of different courses. One is called The Lunar Apothecary, which is all about kind of figuring out the reason why you're called to do healing work. And we use the tools of sort of lunar centered herbalism to help us discover that. Then I also teach the Tarot Apothecary, which is about the intersections of herbalism and the tradition of tarot, which is a lot of fun. And
Mm-hmm.
my newest little kind of mini course that I just launched, I guess, this past fall, is called Begin with the Breath. And I basically was like, I've been talking about breath work for years. So here are the techniques that I really like,
Mm-hmm.
and that I use. And that one is offered if you want to kind of get an idea of what one of my sliding scales would look like, that one is offered on a real large and generous sliding scale. Then I teach in person here in Sacramento. So
Cool. Thank
yeah,
you. And we'll link to
thank
that
you.
in the show notes as well. So if anyone didn't have a chance to write it down, it'll be there as well. Alexis, thank you so, so much for making the time and for sharing so much wisdom and insight and your observation. It's been really beautiful to talk to you.
This has been wonderful. This has flown by. I had a really great time.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Yeah.